This audiobook is distributed by Christian Audio. Please visit christianaudio.com to offer your impressions of this work and to explore additional titles.
Piercing the Darkness, a Crossway book written and read by Frank Peretti. It could have begun in any town. Bacon's Corner was nothing special, just a little farming town far from the interstate, with exit signs offering gas, no lodging, maybe a little food if the place was open, and little more. But it began in Bacon's Corner, behind a dismal rented farmhouse. A flapping, a fluttering, a free-for-all, then a long, eerie shriek racing through the forest, moving this way and that through the trees like a hunted animal. Then a flash of light giving chase, moving with blinding speed. More screams, more flashing lights. Suddenly the forest was filled with them. The trees ended where a pasture began. The chase broke into the open. First out of the forest came a black, bulb-eyed thing, its dark wings whirring, its breath pouring out like a long yellow ribbon. Right behind it, and so dangerously close, the sun itself exploded out of the forest, a brilliant comet with wings of fire and a sword of lightning. The demon could feel the heat of the warrior's blade right at its heels. No, turn away! I'm going! The fiery blade cut an arc through the air. The demon withered and slipped from the world of mankind, gone in a tumbling puff of red smoke. Other warriors were striking demons from the sky like foul insects until only one was left, spinning and tumbling on one good wing. An angel swatted the demon away with the flat of his blade, and it fled. Then it was over. But not soon enough. "Is she all right?" asked Nathan, sheathing his sword. "She's injured and frightened," said Mota. "She wants to get away. She won't wait." "Then it's begun," said Armand, "and there will be no stopping it." Sally Rowe lay in the grass, clutching her throat and gasping for air, taking long, deliberate breaths, trying to clear her head, trying to think. A raw welch was rising on her neck. Her plaid shirt was reddened from a wound on her shoulder. She kept looking toward the goat pen, but nothing stirred there. There was no life, nothing left to harm her. She struggled to her feet, her world spinning, and staggered up the back porch steps. She wouldn't take much with her. She couldn't. There wasn't time. Irene Bledsoe accelerated the green Plymouth along the Toe Springs Claytonville Road, her crinkled face wearing a deeper scowl than usual as she yelled over her shoulder, "You two be quiet now. Believe me, we're doing this for your own good." Bledsoe's words brought no comfort to Ruth, 6, and Josiah, 9. Ruth kept crying, "I want my daddy." Josiah could only sit there silently, numb with shock and disbelief. Sally had changed her shirt and donned a blue jacket. With her heart racing, she ran for her old blue pickup truck and clambered inside. With a surge of power and a spraying of gravel, it rumbled down the long driveway toward the road. Irene Bledsoe was speeding, but there were no cops around. She could see a stop sign coming up. Oh, that was a stupid idea, clear out here in the middle of nowhere. She eased back on the throttle and figured she could just sneak through. What? Where did... She hit the brakes. The wheels locked. The tires screamed. The car fishtailed as some idiot in a blue pickup swerved wildly through the intersection trying to avoid her. Little Ruth wasn't belted in. She smacked her head and started screaming. "Be quiet!" Bledsoe shouted. Now Josiah was crying too. He wasn't belted in either and had had quite a tumbling back there. "You two kids, shut up!" Josiah could see a lady get out of the pickup. She had red hair and a checkered scarf on her head. She looked like she was about to cry, and she was holding her shoulder. Bledsoe stuck her head out the window and screamed a string of profanity at her. The lady didn't say a thing, but Bledsoe must have scared her. She got back in her truck and drove off without saying a word. "The idiot," said Bledsoe. "But you didn't stop," said Josiah. "Don't you tell me how to drive, young man. And why isn't your seatbelt fastened?" Ruth was still screaming, holding her bleeding head. When Officer Ben Cole came into the police station, he could hear Sergeant Mulligan's voice from clear down the hall. He went to Mulligan's door and stuck his head in. The overweight sergeant looked up from his desk. "Hey, Cole, look what I caught today. Another Christian. I'll bet you two know each other." Ben looked at the young man Mulligan had brought in. It was Tom Harris, the young headmaster of the Good Shepherd Academy, the town's small and struggling Christian school. "Hey, Tom, what gives?" "Child abuse," said Mulligan. "Got a real case brewing here." "Then you know far more about this than I do," said Tom. He looked at Ben with tear-reddened eyes. "The sergeant here just stood there while some welfare lady came and took away Ruth and Josiah, and I want to know where they are. I want to see my children." "Now, Harris, Miss Bledsoe had a bona fide court order to pick up your kids in response to a complaint filed against you." Ben was just about to ask her what complaint when the police radio came to life. Bacon's Corner, possible DOA at Fred Potter's farm. 8 crews en route." "Ah, nuts. When it rains, it pours. Come on, let's move." It was getting dark when the 2 squad cars rumbled down the gravel driveway to the Potter's farm. The 8 car was already there, its lights flashing. Fred and Cecilia Potter were standing on their front porch waiting for the police. They were strong, rugged people, but tonight they were obviously shaken. Mulligan had a short conversation with Fred and Cecilia, then led the way across a field toward the small farmhouse the Potters had rented to the victim. "It's that Rowe woman," Mulligan told Ben and another officer, Leonard Jackson. "Sally Rowe. I think she was one of those weird types, some kind of leftover hippie, a loser. I guess she decided to end it all. All right, there's the goat pen. Hey, spread out a bit, you guys. No hiding behind me." 2 paramedics were standing outside the pen, putting away their gear. "She's all yours," said one. Ben glanced around the goat pen, shining his light here and there. His eye caught a spilled pail of goat feed near the door. "Hey, check that out," he said, pointing with his light. Mulligan ignored him and charged right across the goat pen and into the weathered tin-roofed shed, leaving a big manured footprint in the middle of the spilled feed. Then he stopped short. He'd found something. There she was, the dead woman. Ben couldn't see her face. Mulligan was in the way, but she was dressed all in black and lay on her back in the straw, twisted and limp as if someone had wadded her up and thrown her there. Ben found a plaid shirt next to the body. It was stained with blood. "Hey, look at this." Mulligan spun around. "Cole, get back to the Potters and get a statement from them." "But take a look at this." Mulligan didn't take it. He grabbed it. "Go on, get over there." Leonard was shining his light on the woman's face, and now Ben caught a glimpse of it. She was young and beautiful, but violently dead. The expression on the face was blank, the shoulder-length black hair a tangled shadow on the straw. The bloodied shirt, the spilled feed, the obvious violence. This was no suicide. Just outside Claytonville, Sally turned off the highway onto an obscure, overgrown, and rutted road that meandered deep into the forest. Maybe somewhere in here she could find a good spot to abandon the truck. She finally found what looked like a turnaround or dead end. She cranked the wheel hard and let the pickup push its way forward, plowing through the brush and flattening the weeds that rose in front of the headlights. Far enough. She turned off the lights and shut down the engine. Then she sat there, her elbows on the wheel and her head in her hands, the same thoughts repeating in her tortured mind. How did they find me? Why did they want to kill me? She reached into her jacket's pocket for a small object. A ring. Ornate, probably pure gold. She'd taken it from the finger of the strange woman in black. She'd left her bloodied shirt for the police to find, but not this ring. Even though she could make no sense of the strange design on its face or of the cryptic inscription, she knew she'd seen it before, and the memories were her worst. She put the ring back in her pocket and climbed out of the truck. She had to get moving, get someplace safe. She pressed through the dark, fighting the brush as it pulled at her legs, scratched her with its thorns. Somewhere ahead was that old roadway where the ground was still bare and walkable. Underneath the fallen log, 2 yellow eyes were watching her. 2 taloned hands curled in hate. The thing let out a little snicker as she stumbled past. In a low, overhanging branch, another spirit crouched like a grotesque owl, its yellow eyes following her every move. Two black shapes hovering just over the old roadway waited for her to pass beneath them, their long, spindly legs and arms tipped with talons that flexed and curled with anticipation. Her old friends were back. She passed under the two hovering demons. They screamed, enveloping her with sulfur. The other spirits pounced from behind, slapping through her soul with their black wings. She pitched forward into the dirt, a muffled cry in her throat. The spirits alighted on her back and dug their talons in deep. She covered her mouth with her hands, trying to keep a cry inside. The demons gave her a stab and a kick, cackling and shrieking with delight. And then they let her go. Sally got to her feet and ran for the highway, her arms in front of her face to block the forest limbs that slapped and grabbed her. The dark spirits fluttered and flapped after her, chattering and spitting. It was a wonderful, cruel game. But warriors were watching. Deep within the texture of the forest, there were golden eyes watching it all, and strong arms upon ready swords. In Bacon's Corner, Sergeant Mulligan was noticeably quick to label the whole Sally Rowe case a suicide and put it to rest. But Ben Cole still had his suspicions and knew Mulligan's written report carried none of the details they'd all seen that night in the goat pen. Details that suggested murder. In the meantime, there was no small disturbance in the mountaintop retreat of the Strong Man when the demonic ruler got the news.
She is alive! We sought to kill her, but now she is alive and under their protection.
The demonic ranks on either side of him stood tall and straight against the walls. The room was filled with darkness, shadows, yellow fog, a death-like stench. A prince stepped forward and bowed. "Will my lord consider aborting the plan?"
No, not this plan. There's too much to be gained to let one little woman, one pitiful little soul ruin it all. Destroyer!
A shadow stepped forward, a silhouette. It was tall, shrouded in billowing wings. The face was not entirely hideous, but it was evil, cold, and filled with hate.
Your minions failed, Destroyer. She is alive and free. What do you say to that?
The thing stood motionless, the eyes burning with anger, a glowing red sword steady in its hand.
"Give me some real warriors, not the whining little imps of Bacon's Corner. Turn over your best to my command, and you will see what your servant can do."
The strong man studied Destroyer's face and asked,
"What about the rumors I hear?"
Destroyer puffed a derisive laugh through his flaring nostrils.
"If our opponent be this Tal, so much more the thrill of the challenge.
He is mighty.
He is clever. His strength is not in his own sword, but in the saints of God. It was the prayers of the saints that defeated us in Ashton, not this wily captain of the host."
The strong man was dubious.
And just how do you expect to thwart him?
"I will go to the saints first. Already there is plenty in Bacon's Corner for them to be upset about, plenty to divide them. I will keep them busy censuring and smiting each other, and then their hearts will be far from praying."
He held his sword high. Its red glow lit up the room, and his yellow eyes reflected the glow in bloodshot crimson.
"I will pull Tal's strength right out from under him."
The strong man was impressed. The next day, Tom Harris came to understand why his children were taken from him. Lucy Brandon, postmaster at the Bacon's Corner post office, suddenly showed up at the Good Shepherd Academy with a representative from a legal firm and a camera crew from the local TV station. There'd been a misunderstanding recently, and Tom thought he and Mrs. Brandon had cleared it all up. But now, without warning, Lucy Brandon was not only removing her daughter Amber from the school, she was also serving notice that Tom, the school, and the Good Shepherd Community Church were being sued. Tal was there, his sword drawn, watching the car and the news van pull away. He joined Nathan and Armot atop the church building. "So they've decided to go ahead with it," said Nathan. "A strong man can be inflexible," said Tal. "I expect this will be a fight to the finish." A sudden explosion of wings. It was Destroyer, standing tall and imposing, his expansive wings just settling, his glowing red sword drawn. A dozen warriors accompanied him, almost as monstrous as he was.
"If I mistake not, you are Tal, captain of the host."
"I am," said Tal.
"Then the rumors in the ranks are true."
"And who might you be?"
"Call me Destroyer for now. I am the one assigned to the woman."
Tal didn't stir. Taunts never bothered him.
"I thought before the battle begins, the two warlords should meet."
He waved his sword about.
"Look at this little school. Is it really worth all your armies? Captain of the host, we could settle the matter sooner than later."
Tal answered, "The school is ours. The saints are ours."
"The strong man has authorized me to give you the Christian schools in West Haven, in Claytonville, in Toe Springs. You may have them. We'll leave them alone."
Tal remained stone solid. No.
Destroyer only laughed. It must be the woman. Yes, Captain, you did save her life. But remember, she lives for us. Her soul is ours, and not only the woman, but also all the power. The resources, people, minds, money, everything we will ever need to trample you and your motley little flock of saints into the dust. Captain, surrender. Cut your losses. Be content."
"We will see you in battle," said Tal. Destroyer looked at Tal for a long moment, marveling at this angelic warrior's stubbornness. Finally, he nodded.
"In battle, then."
With another explosion of rushing leathery wings, the demons rose into the sky, whooping and wailing, mocking and spitting until they were gone. Kaiman and Scion remained hidden on either side of room 12 at the Rest Easy Motel in Claytonville. There were dark spirits about, apparently Destroyer's scouts looking for the poor, bedraggled fugitive. But the two angels were working hard to maintain a hedge about the woman, to screen her from their sight. Sally gave her head a good rub with a towel and then straightened up for a look in the bathroom mirror. Her once red hair now cascaded over her shoulders and down her back in wet, black strands. Well, maybe it would work if they were only looking for red hair. But her face was still too distinctive. Maybe she could conceal her brown eyes with a pair of glasses, those stylish tinted kind. She could wear a lot of makeup. Her heart sank. She was dreaming, grasping for hope, and she knew it. If they ever spotted her, they would recognize her. She was finished, through, as good as dead. But why struggle, she wondered. If life is so pointless anyway, so futile, so meaningless, why try so hard to hang on to it? She snapped out of such thoughts. It was a waste of time trying to figure it out. Just keep it simple, Sally. Somebody wants to kill you, but you want to stay alive. Those two propositions are enough for now. She checked the cut on her shoulder. No infection, at least. The bleeding was stopped and the wound was closed. She came out of the bathroom and sat on the bed. She'd been shopping that morning as quickly and quietly as possible for the hair rinse, a chain to wear around her neck, some clean clothes, and the morning paper. The Hampton County Star was spread out on the bed. Sally had paged through it the moment she got back to the room. She didn't find what she was after until the bottom of the last page of the news section. Local woman found dead. Bacon's Corner. The body of a local woman was discovered last night in her home, an apparent suicide. The victim is identified as Sally Beth Rowe, 36, an employee at the Bergen Door Company. Her landlady, Cecilia Potter of Bacon's Corner, made the discovery after noticing some of Rowe's goats were loose. "It's a real tragedy," she said. It was a ridiculous piece of reporting. The story was not just wrong, it was incredibly, shockingly wrong. They think the dead woman is me? The woman who tried to kill me? At first, Sally thought it could be good news. They'll think I'm dead. But that notion soon faded. They know I'm not. And they know who that woman was. And they don't want anyone else to know. Sally knew she wasn't hallucinating. The ring, now worn on the chain around her neck, told her that. It was one solid piece of evidence that would help her hold on to reality. But then Sally reached for her jacket and pulled more solid evidence from the pockets. Cash, $10,000 in 3 bundles. The assassin's fee, most likely. Why the woman was carrying it on her person was a mystery, unless she carried the money for the same reason she wore the gold ring. But the question remained. After all these years, what had Sally done? How had she gotten in their way? It had to be what happened in the post office. It was the only thing Sally could think of, a frightening experience and now a horrible memory. It was just like being caught, found out, discovered by an old enemy, a savage enemy. That little girl's eyes. Sally had looked into the eyes of a devil. Ben Cole was beginning to wonder about his gift for timing. He'd just stepped into the station to pick up some more highway flares when he overheard Mulligan in his office, apparently on the telephone, talking to someone in a hushed voice. For Mulligan, even a hushed voice carried. "No, Parnell, I'm telling you, there was nothing on either hand. That's what I said, nothing." Thought Ben. Parnell was the coroner. No, I didn't find anything in her pockets either. I delivered the body to you just the way I found it. Why not ask the medics if you've got a problem? Yeah, Parnell, it's your problem. And I can make it a bigger problem if you just say the word. Mulligan slammed the phone down and cursed. Ben ducked outside as quickly as he could. Joey Parnell, the coroner, missing something from the dead woman's body. Ben had to know more. James Bardeen was a young, handsome lawyer. He was ambitious, a real goal grabber. He had the grit for this work. He was good at it. But right now, he was scared to death. He was sitting in an overly soft couch in the outer office of his boss, Mr. Santinelli, waiting to be called in for a conference. He was trying to compose a defense in his mind, something persuasive. Surely Mr. Santinelli wouldn't make a big thing out of such a little incident? Surely he would consider the fine record Bardeen had accumulated in the past 5 years. The big mahogany door to the conference room opened like the seal of a crypt, and Mr. Santinelli's aide stepped out. "Mr. Santinelli will see you now." The big door closed after them with a thud of finality. Mr. Santinelli sat at the other end of the oval conference table. He was an impressive figure, intimidating by his very presence. "Be seated, Mr. Bardeen." Bardeen took his seat opposite Santinelli. This was going to be a real eye-to-eye meeting. "Mr. Bardeen, let me introduce the gentleman seated with us. This is Mr. Goring of the Summit Institute, here to lend his assistance and expertise. Mr. Mahoney, your immediate superior, is here as well, and we acknowledge his attendance." Mr. Santinelli leafed through the papers in front of him and asked, without looking up, "Mr. Bardeen, are you familiar with the name Sally Beth Rowe?" Bardeen felt the question go through him like an arrow. Yes, sir." "And what about the name Alicia von Bauer?" That felt like several arrows. Yes, sir." Now Santinelli looked directly at Bardeen. Would it be true to say, Mr. Bardeen, that you are extremely familiar with the name of Ms. Von Bauer?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by that.
I'm sure you are aware by now that Ms. Von Bauer is dead.
Mr. Mahoney advised me of that this morning, sir.
Santinelli adjusted his reading glasses and studied the paper in front of him. Sally Beth Rowe. How interesting that she should pop up again, and in Bacon's Corner of all places. At any rate, we have just recently learned that a plan was launched to have Sally Rowe murdered. And of course, to make it look like a suicide. Just whose idea was that?
Bardeen's voice cracked as he said, well...
Santinelli looked at the paper again. To continue my recounting, Alicia Von Bauer, a member of a Satanist organization called Broken Birch, was hired to perform this murder and paid $10,000 as a retainer, with another $10,000 promised upon successful completion of her assignment. Am I correct so far? Mr. Mahoney just looked at Bardeen, and Bardeen looked at Mahoney. Neither man could answer. Santinelli continued, but watched both of them. Apparently, Miss Von Bauer made an attempt on Tuesday night of this week, but found Ms. Rowe to be more than her match. Ms. Rowe escaped, leaving the dead body of her assassin behind, where, theoretically, she herself would have been found had the plan succeeded. He set the paper down in front of him. In other words, this ambitious plot was a pitiful failure. To further complicate matters, the planners of this scheme brought in a local peace officer named Mulligan, as well as the local medical examiner, the assumption being made that these two parties are steadfastly loyal to our cause, seeing that they were actually told in advance that there would be a suicide at the Potter farm, and to handle it as quickly and quietly as possible. By your silence, I take it my account is accurate so far? Santinelli didn't need the answer he didn't get. He just kept going. So, Sally Beth Rowe is alive, and I'm sure totally cognizant that there was a ruthless attempt on her life. We can also be sure that she has a very good idea who was responsible, mainly because of a certain ring Alicia Von Bauer was wearing when she tried to commit the murder. At our request, the medical examiner checked Von Bauer's body for the ring and found it had been removed with the help of cooking oil. We sent some people to search Sally Rowe's house, and the peace officer double-checked the personal effects of the assassin. The ring is gone, and the conclusion is simple. Sally Rowe has it in her possession, along with the $10,000 paid to the assassin. Santinelli made no effort to hide the smirk on his face. Mr. Bardeen, just how was the deceased, Ms. Von Bauer, brought into this? Bardeen felt like a badgered witness on the witness stand. I was talking to her about this particular problem, and she proposed the arrangement. She proposed killing Sally Rowe? Yes, sir, for $20,000. And just where did this discussion take place? Well, I suppose... Wasn't it in your home, Mr. Bardeen? More precisely, in your bedroom? Bardeen was silent. He was stunned. The ring taken from Alicia Von Bauer's finger, it was yours, wasn't it? She stole it, sir. She had to have stolen it from the top of my dresser. She took your ring with your personal inscription on it and placed it on her own finger just in case something went wrong. With your personalized ring, don't you see, she would have had some recourse against us, some proof that it was one of our own top-level attorneys who hired her and paid her that $10,000. Bardeen looked down at the table. I'm sorry, sir. It's too late for that. The damage is done. Santinelli began to gather his papers together. You're a good man, Bardeen. I like your record of accomplishments. In the future, you will show by your example how such actions as we've discussed are never a good idea for any man in your sensitive position. Oh, yes, sir. I will, sir. Santinelli only smiled. Oh, I'm positive of that. Ransacked. The little house was a disaster, just like Mrs. Potter said. Ben stood in the doorway of the Potters' little rental house and figured he'd better have a good look from here before he went inside. The cushions from the couch were tossed on the floor. The rag rug was rolled aside and piled in a corner. In the middle of the floor were papers, books, small boxes, and several items of clothing, apparently the contents of some drawers spilled out. Ben heard footsteps on the front porch. It was Mrs. Potter. "I've never been so disgusted." Ben was quite stunned himself. These were people sent by our department? "That's what they said." "Well, I'll ask Sergeant Mulligan about it. I'm sure they'll take responsibility for cleaning the place up." She just shook her head. "Well, I suppose they may as well box it all up and give it to charity, what with Sally dead. Poor thing. I was going to ask you what to do with her pickup truck now that she's dead. But now I remember, it isn't even here." Ben took note of that. That's unusual? "Well, she always drove it to work, and she always came home in it every day, and if she drove it home the other night, it just seemed sensible that her truck would still be here." Well, maybe it was impounded. I'll check. But it wasn't here the evening I found her." Ben made a curious face. That is a little odd, isn't it? Oh, who knows what's what anymore? Cecilia surveyed the living room. "I guess she was terribly lonely. I figured she was divorced or separated, something like that. Can't see how else a beautiful redhead like that could be all alone and single." She was a redhead? "Sure, had hair like the sunrise. Didn't you see her the other night?" "Well, yes." But suddenly, Ben wasn't so sure. The red Porsche was traveling at better than 90 miles an hour when it failed to negotiate the turn, sailed off the freeway shoulder, and nosed into an embankment. Several cars stopped the moment it happened, and there were many witnesses. Yeah, said a retired vacationer. He was doing fine there, passed my camper like I was standing still, and then zingo, right off the shoulder, just like that." A patrolman wrote it all down. His partner came up the bank from the wreck. "Got an ID for you, Brent." So, was I right?" Yeah, it's James Bardeen, the hotshot kid lawyer. Your favorite. He's dead. Half his body went through the windshield, and he's wrapped up in the hood. They're going to have to cut up the car to get him out of there. As the medics began to pull Bardeen's body from the twisted metal, they didn't see the yellow eyes peering from the rear of the car. They didn't hear the sudden rushing of black leathery wings as the spirits soared away. "You did what?" Attorney Wayne Corrigan had been patiently listening to Tom Harris's story up to this point and had hardly said a word. This was his first question. Tom tried to back up a bit to explain. She was channeling a spirit. We used to call it mediumism. A person allows a demonic spirit to speak through him or her. Corrigan leaned back with a sigh. Okay, go on. Tom wasn't sure he wanted to. "Well, Amber Brandon came to our school just about 3 months ago. Her mother brought her in and signed her up." Did Mrs. Brandon agree to your statement of beliefs?" "Well, yes. She signed her acceptance to them." "What about the paragraph in the handbook about corporal punishment?" "Well, I assumed that she'd read it." All right, go on." "Amber got along fine with the other kids for a while. Then, during recess, she started teaching the children how to relax." "Relaxation techniques? You've heard of it?" Yeah. We had a case a year ago involving yoga being taught in a physical education class, and relaxation techniques were a part of it. Some parents, Christian parents, complained the school was teaching Eastern religion. "So, what happened?" "We complained to the school district, but we didn't get the results we wanted. The school simply changed all the terms and sanitized the program so it wouldn't sound like religion, and then just kept doing it. But let's hear the rest of your story. Well, I asked Amber what she was doing, and she said she learned it in Miss Brewer's class. That would be at the Bacon's Corner Elementary. And that it was fun because it helped you feel better and meet special friends, imaginary guides. Then, just a few days later, Amber started taking on another personality, a little horse named Amethyst. I thought she was just pretending, but she wouldn't stop this behavior, even in class. She'd make horse sounds whenever I called on her, and she'd say, "I'm not Amber, my name is Amethyst." And we started having a real discipline problem. I finally had to take her into the office with Mrs. Fields and have her paddled. Corrigan looked at the document on his desk. I think that's the second item on the complaint here. Yeah, I think so. We followed the procedure clearly stated in the handbook and agreed to by any parent who enrolls their child. Who spanked Amber? Mrs. Fields. It's our policy that the girls must be spanked by a woman and the boys by a man. And how about a witness? Our art teacher served as a witness. We made a record of the whole thing. So, what was Mrs. Brandon's reaction? Well, that's the strange part. She agreed with our action. She wasn't opposed to spanking Amber if Amber needed it. Corrigan looked at the lawsuit again. Somebody's changed her mind. But when did you, Tom knew what Corrigan meant. About a month ago, things went pretty smoothly for about 3 days, and then during noon recess, Amber became a horse again and came back into class as Amethyst. This time I wasn't about to tolerate it. I confronted her, and then something came over that little girl. Her entire personality changed. She began to blaspheme and curse and mock the name of Jesus, and I just had to get her out of there. The other kids were really being disturbed by it. I took her by the arm and had to physically drag her from the room. She was grabbing onto the desks and the chairs and even the other kids. Mrs. Fields could hear the commotion from clear across the hall, and she came running, and it took the two of us to get her into the hall and hold her down. She just wasn't herself. She wasn't Amber Brandon. So I discerned that Amber was manifesting a demonic spirit, and I confronted this Amethyst in the name of Jesus. I ordered it to be silent and to come out of her. Corrigan slumped in his chair and exhaled a long sigh. You tried to cast a demon out of a 10-year-old child? Oh, Mr. Corrigan, you know what the Bible says about demon activity, don't you? Do you think a jury will buy that? Go ahead, try convincing any jury in this country that your behavior was appropriate. Well, what was I supposed to do? Corrigan sat up and leafed through the complaint in front of him. You shouldn't have gone ahead with this act without getting legal counsel. The American Citizens Freedom Association has their fingerprints all over this thing. I suppose you know that. Tom knew. The ACFA, the infamous Association of Professional, Idealistic, Legal Technicians, all for freedom on the exterior, but viciously anti-Christian in their motives and agenda. I thought maybe that was the case. Corrigan tapped the bottom of the first page of the complaint. Ames, Jefferson, and Morris are members of the ACFA. They run the local chapter. Why do you think your two kids were taken away in the first place? As soon as the ACFA heard about this case, they leaked the information to the child protection people. Now you're branded a child abuser, Tom, before you even get to court. The ACFA plays dirty. Well, just look at the complaint here. Outrageous religious behavior against a child. Casting out the demon, of course. Physical abuse by spanking. Excessive religious instruction harmful to the child, harassment, discrimination, religious indoctrination using federal funds. Federal funds? Asked Tom. Lucy Brandon works at the post office, right? She's a federal employee, and under the Federal Daycare Act, she receives a subsidy to help pay Amber's tuition. Didn't you know that? Tom was obviously surprised. This is a federal case, Tom. So what do we do? Well, I'd say you need a lawyer. Tom Harris met with the pastor and board of the Good Shepherd Community Church soon afterward and accepted a leave of absence from the Christian school until everything cleared up. A wise move, considering that vicious rumors and gossip planted by Destroyer's demons were already spreading among the church congregation like a disease. The people were beginning to murmur instead of pray, and the angelic forces could feel the loss of prayer support. But during all this, Sally Rowe learned through the news media about the lawsuit against the school, and she immediately recognized the plaintiff, Lucy Brandon, and her little girl, Amber. So Tom Harris had met little Amber, too. No wonder he was in such trouble. Sally determined she must help Tom Harris, but that would mean retracing some painful steps in her life and digging up her own dark past. Not knowing she was being shielded and guarded by angels, Sally began her quest at the Bacon's Corner Elementary School where Amber Brandon had attended the 4th grade. Amber's former teacher, Miss Brewer, was a kindly young woman and quite cooperative in letting Sally look over the curriculum she'd used with Amber and the other children. A course in self-esteem and personal fulfillment entitled Finding the Real Me. The sight of the curriculum and the memories it dredged up were disturbing enough for Sally, but the name of the publisher immediately turned her stomach, the Omega Center for Educational Studies. Sally could only peruse the curriculum for a few moments before fleeing from the school as if running from a fire. Mulligan's ears were so red they almost glowed. "Cole, you are just that far from being canned." But Ben stood tall and straight and wouldn't let Mulligan intimidate him. "I just thought you might be interested in what I've found out, Sergeant Mulligan, sir." "I don't need to hear anything about Sally Rowe. That case is closed because I said so." "I've talked to Mrs. Potter, and I've also talked to Sally Rowe's supervisor at the Bergen Door Company, and their descriptions of Sally Rowe are consistent. Sally Rowe was in her mid to late 30s, about 5'6", with long red hair." "What of it?" "The woman we found in the goat shed was younger, with black hair, probably shoulder length, but no longer." Mulligan smiled a smile of pity. He put his big hand on Ben's shoulder. "Cole, come on. It was dark in there. You only saw the body for a second. I don't know what's gotten into you." "Sergeant, why was the house ransacked? Did you authorize that?" "Sure I did. We were looking for evidence." "Evidence of what? You said it was a suicide." "Standard procedure. Isn't your shift about over?" "I have a message for you from Mrs. Potter. She'd like to have that mess cleaned up by whoever made it." That's taken care of. Don't worry your little head about it." "And whatever happened to Sally Rowe's pickup truck?" Mulligan looked at him funny. "Why, what pickup truck?" "Sally Rowe always drove a '65 blue Chevy pickup. I let Mrs. Potter go through our vehicle ID book yesterday, and she pointed out the make and model to me. The truck's nowhere around the property. I was wondering if the same people who ransacked the house may have made off with her truck." Now Mulligan looked a little worried. I don't know anything about that. And since we're on the subject, I'm still wondering about that blood-stained shirt we found. Did the coroner ever check the blood type? And the body. That woman didn't hang herself." Mulligan turned his back on Ben, stomped into his office, and returned with some papers in his hand. He slapped them on Ben's desk. "There! The county coroner's report on the death of Sally Rowe. Death by asphyxiation from hanging. Now, if you disagree with the coroner, why don't you come up with another body for him to examine? Your shift is over for today, Officer Cole, and if I hear one more word about this from you, your job is going to be over. You got that? You drop this Sally Rowe thing, you hear?" On Monday morning, a week after Ruth and Josiah were first hauled from his home, Tom got a call from an unidentified lady at the Child Protection Department. Without consulting him and with no prior notice other than this call, an appointment had been set for him to visit with his children for 1 hour under the supervision of a child welfare counselor. The appointment was for 11 that morning at the courthouse in Claytonville. He barely made it in time. His hands trembling and his stomach queasy from the anticipation, he grabbed a brown bag of things for the kids, locked the car, and bounded up the concrete steps of the old stone building. The inside hall was cold marble. Tom sat on a bench and prayed, "Oh, Lord, what can I do? I don't even know what to say." "Mr. Harris?" He sucked in a breath. He was looking up at none other than Irene Bledsoe. "Before I take you upstairs to see your children, I need to remind you that this visitation is a privilege that can be revoked at any time. You are not to touch your children, but remain on your own side of the conference table. You cannot ask them anything about where they are staying. Is all of that clear to you?" But Mrs. Bledsoe, are we going to have a chance to talk this thing out? I want to get this cleared up and get my children back home with me where they belong." "That won't be possible at this time. Our investigation is still in progress." "What investigation? I haven't heard a thing from anyone, and I haven't even been able to get through to you." "We have a very heavy caseload, Mr. Harris. You'll just have to be patient." Tom felt an anger rising inside him. Something totally unchristian, he knew. But it was irrepressible. He just couldn't think of any words that would be civil. "What is this package?" Tom opened the paper bag. "I brought some things for the kids. They don't have their Bibles, so I brought them and some pens and stationery." "Fine." She took the bag. "Come with me." Tom followed Mrs. Bledsoe past a guard and through a doorway. His heart leaped into his throat, and tears flooded his eyes. There, seated on the other side of a large table, were Ruth and Josiah. They were on their feet in an instant, crying, "Daddy!" Their voices shrill with excitement. They ran to him. Irene Bledsoe blocked them with her arms. "Sit down at the table." "I want to see my dad," Josiah cried. "Daddy," was all Ruth could say, her hands outstretched. He couldn't take them in his arms. He couldn't touch them. All he could do was cry. Ruth began sobbing. "Daddy, I love you, Ruth. Daddy loves you. Go ahead. Sit down. Everything's going to be all right." "Mr. Harris, you may sit in this chair facing your children. Let me remind you what we discussed downstairs." Tom slowly sat down. "I want to go home, Daddy," said Ruth, still sobbing. Josiah was trying to be brave and wiped his eyes. "We miss you." Tom noticed the bump on Ruth's head the moment he saw her. What happened to your head, Ruth?" Bledsoe cut in. "We can't discuss that." "Ruth bumped her head on the side of the car," said Josiah. "Now that's enough," said Mrs. Bledsoe. Tom looked at Irene Bledsoe and tried to keep his face calm. "What car, Mrs. Bledsoe?" Mrs. Bledsoe looked at him with her eyebrows raised and her head tilted forward condescendingly. "Mr. Harris, we've found that children will usually concoct stories to protect their parents." Tom caught her meaning. He had to stay calm and cordial. "And just what story did both Ruth and Josiah concoct, Mrs. Bledsoe?" She raised her chin and appeared to look down at him. "Mr. Harris, I can understand how you would be concerned about the injury to Ruth's head. But so are we. I'm sure that given time to get over their fears and prior conditioning, your children will be ready to tell us the truth. For now, I think this visit is concluded." She rose from her chair. "Children, say goodbye to your father." "We just got here," said Josiah. "I don't want to go," Ruth wailed. "Children, we are going," said Mrs. Bledsoe. "Now, just one moment," said Tom. "Josiah, go ahead. Tell me how Ruth got that bump on her head." "We almost got in a wreck. John!" Mrs. Bledsoe yelled. The security guard walked into the room. Bledsoe grabbed both children by the arms. "Mr. Harris, I warned you to control yourself, and you can be sure that your behavior will go down in my report." She started hauling both kids toward the door. Tom was on his feet, ready to do something. The guard stood in his way, just like Mulligan had stood in his way a week ago. It was happening all over again. Mrs. Bledsoe was pulling Ruth and Josiah by their arms, taking them away, screaming. She reached the archway. He wanted to stand in her way. He wanted to reach out and stop her. He couldn't. All he could do was watch it happen. "What wreck, Josiah?" he asked. "Children, come on," Bledsoe shouted, pulling them into the antechamber. "I hit my head," Ruth repeated. "She stopped too fast and I hit my head." Josiah went for broke. "She went through a stop sign and almost hit a blue pickup truck. Ruth hit her head on the door of the car." "She? You mean Mrs. Bledsoe?" Irene Bledsoe had Ruth through the door and jerked Josiah through before he could complete an answer. But Josiah was nodding a firm yes as he disappeared. Sally Rowe was sitting on a bench in a bus depot in another town. Her bus would be leaving in 1 hour. She would spend that hour writing a letter to Tom Harris. "Dear Mr. Harris, I don't know how to start this letter. After all, you don't even know who I am. But let me introduce and explain myself, not just in this letter, but I hope in many more to follow. Perhaps by the time I've written my last letter to you, everything will be clear to both of us. My name is Sally Rowe, formerly a planer sander at the Bergen Door Company. You may have read the recent news story about my death by suicide. I assure you I am the Sally Rowe the news story talked about, and obviously I am alive. Let me tell you what really happened." The day had been perfectly normal. After a full day, Sally finally drove the old blue pickup down the gravel driveway to her house. She was tired and had no other plans than to shower, grab dinner, and go to bed. But there were the goats, Betty, the doe, and her 2 kids, Buff and Bart. Sally parked the truck and headed for their pen. She would greet them first, give them some feed, have her usual one-sided conversation with them, and then go inside and collapse. The goats were excited. Hey, settle down there. Mama's home." She dug a pail of rolled ration from the feed bin beside the house and stepped through the gate into the goats' pen. Sally shook the pail to get their attention. Come on, get some treats." She went into the shed, hoping they would follow her and calm down. "Come on now, it's all right." Shock! A rope came over her head from behind and began crushing her windpipe before she even knew what it was. The pail of feed fell and spilled on the ground. With incredible strength, an unseen assailant heaved on the loop of rope, jerking her body backward, lifting her feet off the ground. Her feet found the wall and she pushed. She and her attacker fell back against the feeder and it cracked. The rope went slack and she wriggled free, dropping to the floor. A woman in black, eyes wild with hate. A knife. The killer pounced like a leopard. Sally ducked to one side. The knife caught Sally in the shoulder. Sally tried to wriggle out of the corner, kicking and clawing the straw and dust. The woman's knee came down on her chest and held her there. The rope fell across her neck again. Sally kicked the woman with one free leg. Just that fast, the woman crashed against the opposite wall of the shed, her head and limbs slapping against the boards. Sally had hardly made contact with her kick, but at least the woman was off her. She scrambled out of the corner, her eyes on her assailant. The assassin slid down the wall to her feet and stumbled forward, her eyes blank and wandering, her jaw hanging. Something struck the woman with such force it lifted her off her feet. She flopped into the straw, her arms limp and flailing, her head crooked, her body lifeless, the rope still in her hand. I didn't take any time to look. I just got out of there, totally occupied with just staying alive. Sally leaned back from her writing. She looked up at the big clock. "Mr. Harris, please keep this letter. Even if it sounds strange to you, even if you don't believe it. I'll write again soon. I remain sincerely yours." Sally signed her full name, Sally Beth Rowe, and carefully took the pages from the spiral notebook. If she hurried, she could get this letter mailed before she left for the next town. 2 angels, Kaiman and Skion, walked beside her, wings unfurled, swords drawn. They had been protecting Sally throughout her journey and knew there were demons who wished her harm. But for now, all was peaceful. At the Bacon's Corner Elementary School, Destroyer with his demonic troops arrived to find that Sally Rowe had already been there and escaped right under the noses of the demons assigned to guard that place. But Destroyer was not daunted by the setback, knowing that even now the Saints were being weakened by the strife and division his warriors were spreading, and that soon enough, Sally Row would be open and vulnerable with no angelic hosts to guard her. Ben would be getting out of the station and out on patrol a little earlier this morning. But first, if he could do it quietly enough, he thought he'd use the police teletype to request a crime check on Sally Row. It just might turn something up.
Cole?
It was Mulligan, and there was something strange about the tone in his voice. Yes, sir. Mulligan came over to Ben's desk. He leaned on it with his big fist and cut into Ben with his eyes.
You been snooping around again?
Snooping?
Leonard tells me you were talking to Joey Parnell, the coroner.
Ben had been a wimp long enough. He faced Mulligan eye to eye. I have never been able to forget what I've seen pertaining to this case and the way it's been handled. I've been bothered by it, I've lost sleep over it, and quite frankly, I've been very disappointed by the incompetence I've seen on the part of some duly elected public servants who ought to know better. Mulligan leaned towards Ben so that their faces were only an inch apart.
Didn't you and Leonard just do a drug bust? I don't see any contraband, Cole. Where is it?
Well, Leonard took care of that, sir.
Leonard! Did you bring any contraband back from that drug bust?
Yeah, about 1/4 kilo of marijuana. Ben took care of it. Ben was incredulous. No way! Mulligan looked back and forth at the two men.
How's about we just take a look in your locker, Cole?
Well, sure thing. But even as Ben said that, he knew he wouldn't be surprised if... Mulligan threw open the locker. The plastic bag of marijuana fell out and landed on the floor.
Looks like you filed it in the wrong place, Cole.
Ben nodded with full knowledge of what was happening. Yeah, right. He looked at Leonard. Next time I'll have to get a lock on my locker instead of trusting the people I work with. Leonard countered quickly. Hey, careful what you say, Ben. This could be serious. Serious? Guys, this is pitiful. Ben reached for his chest. Hey, how about it, Sergeant Mulligan? I'll bet you have a spicy report written up already. Don't worry, you won't need it. He removed his badge and held it out for Mulligan to take. Mulligan took it.
Turn in your uniform by tomorrow.
You got it. The day for Tom's first court hearing arrived. Tom, his pastor Mark Howard, and attorney Wayne Corrigan appeared in federal district court before the Honorable Emily R. Fletcher to show just cause why a temporary injunction against the Christian school should be lifted. The injunction restraining the school from outrageous religious behavior against a child, physical abuse by spanking, excessive religious instruction harmful to the child, harassment, discrimination, and religious indoctrination using federal funds. The ACFA attorneys were there, ready for war, and the press was there, ready to report the battle blow by blow. The ACFA lawyers went first, painting the school as a vicious indoctrination mill where children were emotionally and spiritually abused, and arguing that the restraining order against any such activity should be kept in force. Wayne Corrigan responded on the school's behalf, doing his best to give a more accurate picture of the school and trying to cut holes in the plaintiff's arguments. In the end, both sides won a little and lost a little. Judge Fletcher allowed the school to remain open and continue teaching its Christian-oriented curriculum, but she allowed the restraining order against any further spanking of the children and any further casting out of demons to remain in force until the upcoming trial. So this first minor skirmish was over. The big battle in court was yet to come.